Hey everybody, Dr. Nick here. I just finished recording an excellent episode of The Hospitality Spirit with Gloria Morris, founder and president of Float 60. We talked about a wide variety of topics, including her hospitality career, the role of an entrepreneur, and some advice for students looking to start their own business in a variety of industries. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, Dr. Nicholas Thomas here with The Hospitality Spirit. Thanks so much for joining us. Recorded live from the corner estate in Jackson. This is the Hospitality Spirit podcast. I'm joined today with a great friend of DePaul University, Gloria Morris. Gloria is the founder and president of Float 60 and a DePaul alumnus, graduated with her MBA from DePaul University. We are so excited to have you here today, Gloria.
Thank you. It's great to be back at DePaul. Love it here.
So we are going to cover a wide range of topics today, and lots of exciting topics. And I want to let's start off with a little bit of background about your career. Maybe because that's going to really lay the foundation. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about your kind of what you did in the hospitality industry. But let's maybe just give the listeners a little bit of background about your career up to this point. Don't go too much into about what you're doing in your current role, but maybe everything up to this point so far.
Sure. My first role, Nicholas, was with White Lodging.
We know the
I
company
was 16
well.
years old, and I started working at the front desk of the Radisson, which just got torn down in Maryville, Indiana. That was my first hospitality job, I should say. I was actually working in a fitness center in the same area. It was also owned by White Lodging. And that was my first hotel job. And then from there, I went away to school. I started at IU Bloomington, and I ended up doing a Disney internship. So I was one of the Disney cast members, and I think that's where my real foundation of hospitality was rooted. So after that, I came back home, and everything compared to working at Disney was kind of substandard from a service perspective. Found one company. It's now Caesars Entertainment. Worked for Harrah's at the time. That turned into Caesars. Worked for them for close to 10 years. And so I feel like I've worked for the best of the best. And that's kind of where my hospitality career was rooted. From there, I went into technology on the hospitality side.
So did you do your undergraduate? No, for your undergraduate degree, were you focused on hospitality?
No, just management.
Just management.
I just kept finding myself in hospitality just because I think it was who I was.
Yeah. Now I'm curious because the Caesars Entertainment connection. I mean, that is for someone in the Midwest. I mean, people think, and I'm saying this because I'm teaching actually the casino class now.
I'd love to step in on that one.
Another conversation.
For sure.
What was actually what drew you to a gaming entertainment company like that? Because that's not a very common thing for someone in the Midwest to be drawn to.
Such a great question. So I had come back from Disney. I was finishing classes over at Purdue Calumet, which is a big affiliate of White Lodging, right? And I was just turning 21 years old. And I was working for my family's men's store. So going back even earlier, I was brought up in a business, right? So I worked at my family's men's tailor shop. And that, compared to Disney World, was a total yawn. Couldn't stand it. So I snuck out on one of my days off and drove to Joliet, where they were opening these new casinos. Number one, because I was 21. And number two, I knew this was a really powerful company. Doing research, learning about Harrah's, they had a very good foundation of hospitality, right? So I snuck off on my days off, and I had to break the news to my, God rest their soul, my Nana and Nono, who were my bosses at the time, and say, hey, I just got a job for $7.50 an hour at the casino. So it was my very first hospitality casino role. Because
this was the time that Harrah's was really the gaming entertainment company that was focused on the local market. I mean, that was, we think about gaming at that time, that was really the Strip in Las Vegas,
right,
and Atlantic City. But in reality, you started to see individual states, we're up to kind of the mid-20s right now, that have commercial casinos. But Harrah's really at the time was one of the companies that was starting to go into these other states outside of Nevada and New Jersey.
That's right.
That was really starting to, they were the tip of the spear.
For riverboat gaming.
For riverboat gaming.
When we used to be on cruise ships, right? Little mini yachts. So, it was a very attractive opportunity just because it was so different and it was such a powerful company. They were actually owned by Promise Hotel Group at the time. So very big slant into hospitality on that side as well.
And, when we think of these small little towns here in Illinois, the kicker was the regulatory issues in the state of Illinois was you had to be over running water. So cities like Joliet, Aurora, that's where you put these riverboats.
That's
so
right.
you would see them docked up to the pier.
We had to sail
you had
the
to
ship.
Just back away from the pier, but that was the draw for many people. And you'd have a buffet on the casino or on the riverboat, and people would go on. What was it like working on those riverboats back then?
It was pretty interesting. At the time when I started, literally it was 1993. They had just opened. We were selling tickets. In fact, my first job was working in ticketing. And so we would yield manage the boat because it would fill up, right? So we had to manage the ticket blocks just like we would manage hotel blocks. And we had to actually leave the dock, sail 2 hours, and come back. Just kind of unheard of now, right? It's almost ridiculous. But it was fantastic because, again, it was such a powerful company with so much to offer somebody who's just learning. You have food and beverage, you have operations, you have finance, you have marketing. There's so many avenues that you can learn from, and so that's why I just ended up absolutely loving it and learning so much about both sides.
Little did you know that those skills of yield management would benefit you so greatly.
Without question.
Later on, and we'll maybe get to that in a couple minutes, but you were doing a lot of that yield management prior to all the technology tools that we have today.
Right.
I mean, a lot of it was intuition. A lot of it was kind of shooting from the hip, that saying, what do we think business demand might be, and what's the competition potentially doing? What's kind of holding up the finger and trying to guess which way the wind is blowing, and using that to try to gauge what supply and demand is going to be.
It really was an art and a science, as I use that expression often, as it really is, even with all the technology, right? But we would have to communicate with the casino hosts on board that would manage the VIP ticket blocks, and we'd have to, monitor the ticket sales. It really was a mini revenue management, yield management exercise, and we didn't even know that back then. But really, I have to credit Harrah's for giving me my analytical foundation, because I worked in CRM and worked in, the VIP side and worked in credit and finance. So it really taught me so much about analytics, right, and the different technologies. Even that's how I got into technology, just the database marketing side.
Well, it's interesting because I was just out in Vegas recently, and I think still to this day, even with all the technology that we have, I still think a lot of that intuition still helps drive. What does our gut tell us about what we think the customer is going to want, and what do we think the customer is going to expect a year from now, 5 years from now, a month from now, and it still is somewhat of a guessing game in many cases.
Well, that, and it's also the relationship side is so important, because at the end of the day, the experience and the service will drive the loyalty of that client, and it's not math related when it comes to that, right? Your processes and your procedures are very stringent in terms of queue times and things like that, but at the end of the day, these people who work in hospitality have to be likable people who are also smart and can read a customer and kind of anticipate their needs before they ask.
Sure. And I think it's maybe a little easier in the hotel side of it, but when you factor gaming into it and the casino side, I think it just adds a whole other level of complexity and difficulty to it.
Very interesting observation that I had in the casino industry early on. The casino industry can get people's information because people who are gaming want to get something out of their losses, right? Mm-hmm. So they voluntarily put those cards in, and we start tracking activity, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's how the casino industry really pioneered the whole CRM loyalty program, right? I had the privilege of working in the Gary Loveman days and learned so much about that. Tim Wilmot, too, I'll have to give him a shout out. Mm-hmm. He was one of my first general managers. Very analytical, right? But because the customers willingly give you all this data.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually we had in my first day of my casino class the other day, we were talking about it, and I went around to each of the students and I said, what is something that you have always wanted to know about the casino industry? And one of the students, we got into this idea of kind of loyalty, how they understand it, and we got into this discussion about comps and how comps are awarded. And I said, it is absolutely amazing what customers will willingly tell you about themselves because they think that there is some sort of inherent ROI, that they think it will bring them a larger credit line. They think that it will award them an upgrade. They think that it will award them a greater likelihood of even a line pass to the buffet at the Wynn on a Friday night.
That's a huge deal.
So they will tell you how much they make. They will tell you how much their spouse makes. They will tell you how much they've gambled, not just at your casino, but at other casinos. They will tell you the frequency in which the amount of information that someone will disclose to you in a gaming environment versus they would never disclose that to you in a restaurant environment. They would never disclose that to you in a hotel environment. I polled the class. I said, how many of you would check into a Marriott or a Hilton and tell the front desk agent how much you make as a justification for why you should get a ocean view room?
Right.
No one would. But I couldn't tell you the number of times somebody at the Bellagio or the Venetian or the Wynn would come in and say, do you know how much money I make? That's why I should get this buffet for free, or this is how much I gambled. You should take this off my bill. It's amazing how much people will voluntarily tell you that. So from a CRM standpoint, it's such rich with data. And I mean, that must have just been amazing for you as somebody that loves data analytics.
It is, but it also offered me a challenge over time. I worked in that business for so long on the inside and the outside. When I left Harrah's, I worked with a big, huge data warehousing company, and that was one of their clients, and I worked in gaming with this technology company, and it starts to become a little bit taxing on you ethically, knowing that you're, using this data to basically get an incremental visit out of the customer or whatnot. So I had a little bit of a challenge with that over time, but the foundational skills that I learned about CRM and data, unparalleled. Right?
Unparalleled, yeah. So let's maybe shift gears a little bit. So you had a wonderful career in the hospitality industry, and then you kind of decided you got this, it clearly was in your family, this entrepreneurship bug. You mentioned that your family had the clothing business, and that was
they still do.
They still do. So you kind of grew up in that. So it was inherently in your blood.
Yes.
But you decided that you wanted to transition from the hospitality, still staying in what I would consider the service industry, but you wanted to provide a opportunity for others to participate in an experience, and you wanted to create a business that allowed them to do that. So you wanted to do that by becoming an entrepreneur yourself. So talk a little bit about what that transition was like, and talk a little bit about the type of business that you started.
So a big gap between that hospitality side and this topic of today of my company is I spent another decade, and I'm revealing my age, I've got a decade of technology behind me that wasn't hospitality related. So it was a time where, I'm learning about all types of new technologies. I definitely favor that in terms of something I love to do. I'm just a dabbler. I love to try new softwares. So I'm always plugged in. I'm always wired, right? I'm always on, always looking at data, always analytical. And I tried...
Side question. I saw a presentation you gave. How many apps do you have on your phone?
There's close to 300.
Okay. I saw a presentation you gave, and you were an app junkie on your phone. You have so many apps on your phone.
Apps are so accessible, and they're so powerful, and they're so cheap, right? Like, I have no problem paying $5 or $10 for an app, and most people are like, what? But the functionality is so cool.
It just shows how much you love technology.
I'm totally a nerd. Okay. But yes, so I kind of transitioned only because I tried this experience in 2015 called float therapy. And I tried it at a place that was open 34 years. This is not a new technology per se, but the way it's presented today is much different and much more modernized. But I tried this, and again, me being on and in technology, I have rarely the opportunity to just relax. I also have 3 children and a dog. So when I tried this, it kind of changed my life. It stopped me in my tracks, and I thought I really need to do something like this more often. In fact, I know a lot of other people who need to do this a lot more often than they do. So I kind of thought about it and thought if I could create this business. Can I say what it is now? Or are you going to?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
This business called Float 60, which is literal. You float for 60 minutes and create a space that's modern and clean and welcoming. Then this might not be such a scary thing, because traditionally float tanks are very intimidating to people. They used to be called sensory deprivation tanks. We still call them that. So the notion of sensory deprivation is terrifying to some people. So yeah, that's kind of what I started.
Okay, so let's just walk people through this real quick. What this is, just so people, and then we can talk a little about being an entrepreneur. So when you say floating, what is that? When in sensory deprivation, what does that actually mean? Okay. I've done it, so you know, yes. But I will probably botch the description of it. You can probably say it much more eloquently.
Okay, so
and I loved it, by the way, when I did it.
Well, you definitely need to do it more often. So essentially, it is a personal pool, if you will, and it's got about a foot of water that's perfectly warm to the temperature of your external skin. So it's about 93, 94 degrees. The water is saturated with over 1,000 pounds of pharmaceutical-grade Epsom salt, which is magnesium. And magnesium is a natural muscle relaxer. So the water is so dense with salt, kind of like the Dead Sea, that you just effortlessly float. So you get in.
You literally float.
Yeah. It's such a unique experience. There's nothing like it. You really can't describe it. So sometimes you'll get smart aleck people will say, I can just buy Epsom salt and soak in my tub. Well, you can do that. You can soak in your tub, but you can't float in your tub, right? And you can't do it effortlessly. And if you did, you'd have a big problem in your bathroom. So the water that it takes and the salt that it takes to make this happen for 60 minutes is intense. So it's definitely an experience that helps people relax, but it's also physical qualities is helping your muscles recover from, you're actually soaking in this magnesium, which again is a muscle relaxer. So that coupled with the fact that you've unplugged from the universe for 60 minutes and you don't have your phone, but you're awake, you never do that.
So it's 2 things. One, it's the actual act of floating, which is the relaxation part. But then it's 2, you're in a chamber that is the sensory deprivation. So the light is limited, the noise is limited, and so it's completely quiet. So it's this meditative cocoon, if you will. So when you combine those 2 things, it's really the ultimate meditation.
Yes.
Stress release.
The idea is to remove all external stimuli coming at you. And, the term sensory deprivation is kind of misleading because especially here in the city, we've worked really hard to have no light, no sound. But it's difficult here, right? You could still kind of hear the rumble from the train once in a while, but you've minimized external stimuli to the point where your brain is operating a little bit differently. So, yeah, I would say there's 3 benefits. One is the relaxation part. That's just a given. People cannot believe how relaxed they feel. We always joke around that people are much nicer when they leave than when they come in. They're less stressed out. But, the physical benefit of the magnesium is very powerful, just to make your body feel better, less aches, less pain. But the mental aspect is truly remarkable because, again, the only time that you're really not stimulated by something is when you're sleeping. Mm-hmm. And so some people fall asleep, but kind of the sweet spot in a float tank is that point right before you fall asleep. So you're kind of relaxed and your mind is in another place. You're not sure where you are. Sometimes you have that hypnagogic jerk in your sleep. That's kind of the holy grail of floating.
Yeah, I remember for me it took me about 20 minutes just to shut my brain off. Then I floated, and then it was this almost a day and a half of just this euphoria, of just this calmness.
Yeah.
It literally lasted about a day and a half of just this tranquility and inner peace that came with it, and it was a remarkable feeling. I tell you, Jamie, you got to do this. It's the real deal.
It really is,
yeah.
And the more you do it, the more kind of sustainable that feeling of calm is. I can tell when I don't float for a while because as a business owner, which I'm sure we'll talk about, it's a very stressful business, just like any business, but it does have lasting effects. And people, like I said, they need this detachment from this external stimuli that's just constantly coming at us. It's so much more than it was 3 years ago, certainly even last year, right? So I believe this modality and modalities like this that kind of help us detach from the stimulus are critically important for mental well-being moving forward.
So what was it like? What was it like transitioning from, I'll put the word corporate world in quotes because we all define that a little bit differently, but what was it like transitioning from you're into a scenario where you're essentially your own boss? I mean, that's a huge risk to take. I mean, I know people that have done it, and the big thing that there are so many variables that scares them, but everybody kind of, the common denominator that they all say is it's a scary feeling to say, if I fail, it all rests on my shoulders. I mean, talk a little bit about what that process was like. I mean, the concept, you believed in the concept. You knew that
right.
You knew that the idea was sustainable, but you weren't necessarily sure that you were going to be sustainable at it.
Correct. And unlike a lot of people who go off and start businesses, I really loved working in technology. I still do. In fact, when I started Float 60, I structured my business in such a way that I could still do my technology consulting and business consulting. So as far as the transition goes, I've been helping business owners for a decade at that point, helping them run their businesses, from consulting on their technology, consulting on their marketing, consulting on their data. So I felt like I already had the tools and the skills to do it myself for my own business because I spent so much time helping others. The transition of actually letting go of that stability was terrifying, honestly. But I never at any point thought, oh, that was not the right thing to do. I still plan on going back to technology. The way I've built the company, it's in such a way that it's scaled to 3 locations now, which is a whole other discussion. But I've got the people in place to sustain it and scale it. So it's terrifying to think that might fail, but you can't think that way as an entrepreneur. You have to know you believe in your concept enough and know that you put the hours in, you put the structure in enough to make sure that if something isn't going well, you just have to modify it. So in my mind, if floating goes out of style or if there's something that makes it go away, I'm just going to have to pivot, go in a different direction. I believe that the foundation we've laid addresses something that the world needs. So
I think that's important, is that you also found something that not just that the world needs, but it was also something that you are passionate about.
Yes.
That the world needs coffee shops. The world needs sandwich shops. The world needs mechanisms for transportation. But are you passionate about that?
Right.
You seem like you found something that you genuinely in your heart believe in is a great thing. And I would presume that makes it a lot easier to be an entrepreneur. I mean, the saying, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
I don't think that's true.
You don't?
You still work, you just love it, right?
Okay. It's not a job per se.
Yes, you thrive. I think entrepreneurs thrive on certain characteristics of the process, right? So I have learned that about myself. I'm a builder. I love to build things. I love to see things from infancy to execution, and then, your mind starts going somewhere else. The thing with this business is I do believe in it. So if there's any advice I give entrepreneurs is you have to find something that you really do believe in, that you can evangelize and that you can use yourself. And I think if you don't have that, then it just kind of fades away until your next new thing, right? So I will have a next new thing, but I think that this will always be a passion as well.
Yeah, I guess a friend of mine teaches down in Australia at a university down there. He teaches courses related to entrepreneurship. Matt, if you're listening, hello. And I remember him talking at dinner one night about this kind of 5-year clock, where a lot of entrepreneurs, after that 5-year period, they kind of plateau and they're ready to move on. I mean, so when did you kind of start this process?
I started this process 3 years ago. So my first float was 2015, and then I opened 9 months later. But yeah, I know what you're getting at, and I think everybody's time frame is a little bit different. If you're truly that entrepreneur type, there is something to that building process. And if you've built everything, then it might not be something that you can sustain in that one company. Like for me, I've built 3 locations in 3 years, so I've been building for 3 years. Now that I don't have a 4th location identified, and I don't think I will go in that direction, I have a different growth strategy in mind. It's a little scary to me because now it's a different type of role, right? And
I'm not sure necessarily that opening a new location fulfills that need.
Yeah.
It's maybe you have this constant need to try something new and reinvent and a new challenge. You've opened 3 locations. The 4th wouldn't necessarily. Yes, there would be challenges with construction and doing a market analysis and would it work here, but it wouldn't bring you the same joy and satisfaction that it would.
Yeah, I would definitely say that could be the case, right? But it's exciting. I spend a lot of time consulting in the industry, so I love helping other people build their own float centers, and it gives you joy for sure if you see things kind of starting from ground zero and built up.
So when I was listening to this presentation you gave, you got really excited when you talked about I believe you called them artists that you have working with you and the people that work at Float 60. Talk about that part of being an entrepreneur, because that seems the people that you bring on, because you've invested so much of yourself in this business. This is Gloria's business. Who you bring into that inner circle seems like a very personal. They essentially become part of your family. I mean, you spend as much, if not maybe more time with them than you do your kids and your spouse. I mean, so what is that process like, and what's that like as an entrepreneur?
So that is, I would say, the hardest part of the business, because you're right. You build something, and then, especially when you have multiple locations, you have to rely on others to kind of see out your vision for service and your vision for the brand, and nobody sees the same things that you do. When I walk into a space, and it's a curse, I'm sure you have the same curse being in hospitality all these years, when you walk into a space, your eyes go to certain things that consumers, clients, guests don't see, right? So the challenge that I've had with building the team of now 29 people is this business is very challenging in that you've got people who are coming in doing something completely foreign for the first time, something that's sometimes very scary. And so our people have to be very empathetic and very good at reading people. And they also have to be extremely detail-oriented when it comes to keeping a clean environment, which is the number one thing we have to do in the float center. Salt is our frenemy. So it's like having oceans inside your building. It's very challenging. But to your question, so the way I've structured the business, I've had a director since we've opened the doors 3 years ago, and they really are the front line to the team, the day-to-day operations, where I'm doing a lot of things behind the scenes. But you're so right in that when we hire people on, they do become like family, and I would say that's kind of a weakness of mine that I've recently identified be more challenging than before. I had to let somebody go this past Monday. And it goes against everything I believe in to let somebody go without turning over every single stone you can turn to bring out the best in that employee, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have to finally take that path, it's really painful. Yeah. So, I just happened to do that Monday. That's why I started breaking out into hives when you started talking about it. But that by far is the most challenging part of running the business, just knowing that it's a 7-day a week operation, and there's 3 locations, and I'd have to depend on others who, treat it as a job sometimes. They don't have the same investment that you do, especially when you are in the city and there's a lot of transient people. It's a different type of environment. So,
you also with your business, it's also really, I think what's really fascinating about your particular about Float 60 is that the locations of where you've chosen to open up. You have River North, you have Printers Row, South Loop area, and then you have Northern Indiana.
Correct.
So you have 3 very, very distinct locations, 3 very distinct customer bases and markets, which to me would say you have 3 very distinct marketing strategies. What was the thought process there? I mean, is that and most efficient use of time and effort there? I mean, as opposed to maybe 2 in River North, and then you could be a little bit more efficient with your efforts. I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So when I think about Chicago and I think about all the different neighborhoods, you're absolutely right. They're like different states within this little country, right? And I was very methodical about bringing a new location that was close enough to have overflow if we needed it, because we've been at 92% occupancy since we opened River North for 3 years. It's crazy that I'm saying that. I wanted to have a place where we could send people if they couldn't get in River North that wasn't too far, but yet also pull from a completely new neighborhood. There's a lot of people from South Loop that will never go to River North and vice versa, right? So it's interesting in the city. It was very important for me to be in the city because of the population of the city, right? I mean, we have 35 floats a day. We have other modalities too, but to hit those occupancy numbers, I have to pull from a big group of people because it is such a unique concept. Indiana, though, is completely different in terms of the way we market to retain customers, right? So here, and I may have talked about this in that talk, but the customer acquisition in River North is important, but it's even more important here in the South Loop because we have so much turnover in terms of people in school, people in hotels, tourism, whereas River North's more neighborhood stability. In Indiana, you have a fixed population, and you have to constantly think about retention because you have a limited window of acquisition. You always have some, but it's not like here where we can have new customers walking in every single day. I've found myself really focusing on that because part of my model was to see if we could operate in a suburban and an urban location and have economies of scale.
What was the thought process about going to northern Indiana as opposed to western suburbs?
My personal residence, because that's where I'm from.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I have to just say this. If you're not familiar with Northwest Indiana, it's kind of interesting there. It's the region, right? and I'm a proud region rat.
Okay.
So when I went to IU Bloomington, I remember being referred to as, oh, she's from the region, or, people in Indiana hate people from the region because we act like we're from Chicago, and people from Chicago hate people from the region because we act like we're from Chicago. So it's this interesting dynamic, but the people in my neighborhood, and by the way, that area is the only area that's on Central Time and gets Chicago news and sports, right? So,
well, evidently the pizza's better in the region. That's what I've heard.
From where?
People just tell me the pizza's better down in that part.
I'm not sure about that,
okay,
but
that's what
no, we have some great. But the point is, everybody in my area, we all go to Chicago all the time, right? Mm-hmm. We're comfortable in Chicago. We are a Chicago suburb. So that's kind of why it made sense. It was important for me to be established in Chicago before I entered the Northwest Indiana market with floating, because we're slower to adopt, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a population of people who leave the region all the time to come to Chicago to do things that are unique and things that they can't find in the region. So I have to say I'm so thrilled with the community's embracing of our modalities. We have cryotherapy there as well, and it's been a great move, and plus it's 10 minutes away from my house.
What's cryotherapy? Oh, for like frozen?
Yes, cryotherapy. So it's also a progressive modality, and it's much different than floating, but it addresses inflammation as well, and super fast, 2 to 3 minutes, relieves aches and pains so fast, swollen body parts. We hit it with the liquid nitrogen. I mean, it's really profound. So,
Jamie, we're going to try that.
Yeah, you have to take a jaunt down to Northwest Indiana, that other country. But it's very pleasant. We have a Whole Foods there. Okay, so that's kind of where my demographic study took place. Okay, that can work. But yeah, again, back to your question around marketing, I did want to mention the economies of scale, because the efforts that I do with marketing in the Chicagoland area, they carry over to all 3 locations. So I can hit all 3 locations personally with no problem. I also have employees who go between all 3 locations.
That was going to be one of my questions. Yeah.
And certainly between South Loop and River North, I have employees going back and forth all the time. So the idea is to create one team, feel like one family. I use some technology tools to do that. It's not really easy all the time, but things like getting products delivered or our supplies delivered in one location and us transporting them to other locations. So there are efficiencies there for sure. And our marketing dollar is stretched between 3 locations versus a big spend to 1. So everybody should be healthier from a P&L standpoint.
How does an entrepreneur that truly believes in the product that they have created, that has invested so much of their time and effort, how does this not become every waking moment of your life? I mean, how do you create work-life balance as an entrepreneur?
I think, again, going back to the structure I have of having a team that I've been able to bring on from the very beginning, I think that's the number one piece of advice I would give somebody. When you create a business, if you don't want to be a slave to your business, you have to trust people and bring them to a level to where you can feel okay with leaving the country. And, they don't have to depend on me to run the day-to-day operations. I think it's also important for entrepreneurs to know that they cannot do everything well. So many people will open businesses forgetting about the fact that they have to do everything, right? Finance, accounting, ordering. I don't know if you've probably read The E-Myth, but it's, a great book for anybody going into entrepreneurship. You have to do a little of everything, and you have to like it. But when you're going to build something that is bigger, you have to invest in the resources. You cannot do it all well. You can try to do it all, but you can't do it all well, and then you'll suffer. And honestly, I don't have that code cracked because I'm still out of balance a little bit. I need to take better care of myself. I need to personally float more, but it's hard. It's
You're
hard.
Still learning.
Yeah,
You're
still learning.
Yeah. I've told my students, even a teacher. I mean, a teacher never stops learning.
Never.
I learn every day. Every day I walk into class, I learn something new every single day.
Well, and that's a gift to be able to recognize that you want to, right? Because so many people have that fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, and I thrive on that. I love learning getting tips from I listen to podcasts like crazy and, read various business books. And you need to constantly learn, but it's a battle. Some days are way easier than others. Absolutely. That's for sure.
So with nice segue. So you did your MBA here at DePaul.
Yeah, I actually did a master's program. It wasn't an MBA.
Oh, the master's program.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you pick DePaul? What was the interest in that? What did you gain out of that?
I wanted to be in a city, urban location. I read about some of the different programs here, and I was very interested. I loved going to school here. In fact, I was trying to get my son, who's graduating from high school right now, to come to DePaul, but he's going somewhere else, I think. I just love the city, so I wanted to pick a place where I could, study and enjoy the city and be kind of close to home at the same time. So, I graduated in 2015, and ironically, that's when I started Float 60, so I think it all had something to do with...
The stars aligned, as they say.
Yes.
So if you had, as we kind of wrap up here, this has been a really insightful conversation. So if somebody's sitting here listening to this podcast, in addition to subscribing, what advice would you give them as they think about being a entrepreneur? If they're saying, I think I might want to be an entrepreneur. I think I might want to follow my passion, follow my dreams. What advice would you give them, Gloria?
I would say the number one thing is to start opening doors to things that you're interested in first. So many people kind of look for money opportunities, and they don't necessarily pan out to translating to something they'll love, right? We see it now in the float industry where people are interested in starting their own float centers, but maybe they never even floated before. So I would say, your best shot at being successful is to do something that's making you tick, something that you're passionate about, whether it's, something product related or consumer related, nonprofit related, something that drives fulfillment other than just the vision of being wealthy someday, right? They don't always go hand in hand, but you'll enjoy your work if you find something that you're really passionate about.
Find something that you're passionate about. I love that. That's a great way to end it. Well, thank you so much, Gloria. This has been a really great conversation. It's always nice to talk to you. We've known each other for a while, and I always enjoy it. I always leave our conversations refreshed and motivated to keep on doing. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's great to be back at DePaul.
Well, this has been The Hospitality Spirit, recorded live at the Corner Estate in Jackson in the Driehaus College of Business. Thanks so much for listening.